Down here, we call them hollers. I actually lived in one my entire childhood, nestled between hills and mountains, wooded valleys as far as my young self could explore. The hollow was always a creepy setting. According to artsandsciences.sc.edu, a hollow is a small sheltered valley that usually, but not necessarily, has a watercourse. And I'm sure you've heard of the movie or the legend of Sleepy Hollow. Well, get comfy because today's set of stories take place in hollows, and you'll soon discover that hollows are a very terrifying place to be. Enjoy, and be sure to send me your scary stories at darkstories.org. Hit the like button, subscribe or follow here on YouTube, Spotify, iTunes, or your favorite podcasting service, and leave us a review on iTunes too. Thanks. Now, let's begin. Owl's Hollow Road from LevelZero. When I was in high school, my friends and I loved to ride around at night and explore new locations around town. We tried to find roads that seemed to go nowhere. Sometimes we'd try one and it would only go a mile or so to a dead end. On other occasions, we would ride for an hour before we'd gone far enough. Then we'd find a way back home. Keep in mind, we lived in a decent-sized city, surrounded by nothing but mountains and farmland, so we had no idea where we'd end up when we took a road on the outskirts that led off towards some mountain or field. It was often exciting, sometimes boring, but nothing major ever happened. We just smoked our weed and drank our beer while driving in the middle of nowhere with no fear of the cops. It was around 2006 we discovered maps on the internet, and we thought we might try to find a decent road to take that we'd never gone down before. After all, these maps would show us the approximate length and where it would lead to. We chose Owl's Hollow Road. This one was strange because we had never noticed it before, even though it began near the middle of town and branched off of a main road near some apartments, which we already knew well. Nonetheless, we grabbed our weed and drinks and jumped in my old blue Chevy truck for what looked like a pretty long drive. We weren't too worried because the road ended on the main highway by a gas station that led straight back to my house. We were driving down this road that we had discovered, enjoying ourselves to the fullest, but eventually things turned out to be a bit creepy. It was completely wooded on both sides, with branches hanging over the road like some sort of tunnel. There were a few small homes at the start, but human dwellings soon stopped showing up after a few miles. We were about 30 miles in when I questioned my friends if they had any idea how long the road was. It had been quite a long time, and we hadn't seen a streetlight or even a house in miles. Their response was, no, how are we supposed to tell by the lines on this map? I then decided to inform them that I was going to be needing gas soon, as the warning light had been on for about 15 miles now. Quickly, they flogged me with questions of, why didn't you tell us before? We should have just turned around. I myself was enraptured with the spookiness and nothingness of this location, nestled in the valley of the mountain. It was all completely unknown to me. There turned out to be no gas stations or any homes on this road before we ran out of gas. Everyone freaked out, considering no one knew where we were, and neither did we. I told my friends to calm down, and at the very least we could just sit and smoke some, while we waited for someone to pass by. Then we could ask them for help. Immediately, they reminded me that we had not seen another car, house, or light in 30 miles. If for nothing else but to calm them down, I told them they didn't make roads for nothing. And about that time, we actually saw headlights in the distance for the first time in nearly an hour. My best friend Sam immediately jumped out and flagged down the truck that was heading towards us. The driver was a burly, white-haired and bearded man whose face looked like it had been cooking in the sun for 70 years. He politely asked if he could help. "Yes, we ran out of gas and we're hoping you could help us out," Sam shouted. We thought no one would come. The man then informed us that he had a gas can at his house about 20 minutes down the road. The man asked if anyone would like to go with him rather than just sit out here. He claimed that some weird things went on out there. Obviously, I wasn't leaving my pride and joy in the middle of nowhere alone, and my brother and our friend John decided it would be more fun to just sit and get messed up while waiting. Sam, however, decided to hop into the bed of the man's truck, claiming he wanted to ensure he came back to help us. Sam was gone, and he wouldn't be back for a while. It was then that I noticed a fire in the woods. I pointed the fire out to John and my brother, who asked what the deal was. People probably camp out here since it's so secluded. I guess because I was high and a little drunk, I decided to go check it out and told them they could come with me or stay here. They came along, and that was a huge mistake. I had been bluffing about going alone. If they had just stayed in the truck, none of this would have happened. We followed the fire through thick brush and brambles. We even crossed a small creek, which I thought in hindsight reminded me of the one from the Blair Witch Project. Yeah, kinda creepy. We were just about to the source of the flame when it completely disappeared. Not a trace of smoke or anything as soon as we were 20 yards from it. I looked around, and I saw my companions' faces in the moonlight, stunned as I was, because another 50 yards ahead was another fire. We looked back and could still see the moon reflecting off the bright blue of my Chevrolet. At this point, we decided we had come too far and should investigate the strange fire further. Maybe we had been high and misjudged the distance. Nevertheless, we continued after the fire, which further led us into the woods. Yet each time we got close, it would disappear and reappear further in the woods. I'm not joking and have witnesses to this. To this day, we still talk about this moving fire. So about the fourth time we finally caught up to the fire, at which point we were 200 yards into the woods at least, the fire didn't move. It had stopped moving. We were able to walk near it. But that's when we saw a masked figure surrounding it, chanting something in some language we could not understand. We had been quiet and not talking at all since the first instance, so we were not noticed, not right away. As soon as my younger brother caught a glimpse of the scene, he whispered to me, "They were trying to lure us here. We are meant to be sacrifices." Before I could tell him how dumb that sounded, almost as if they could hear him, every head in the ceremony turned right towards us. There must have been 20 of them. With a roar from each of them and a scream from us, we turned and ran back the direction we came. With no fire to guide us now, we were guessing, running into trees, tripping over logs, tearing our clothes on briars. We fled as fast and as far as we could, as we were undoubtedly pursued by these people. We could hear them coming, and they most certainly were human because, like us, we could hear them injuring themselves just as we were. Finally, we all made it to the truck. I saw Sam, to my delight, pouring gas into my truck, with no sign of the man who had helped him. He waved and shouted, asking where we'd been. "Is there enough gas in the truck?" I shouted. Yeah, I was just pouring in the rest," he replied. "Get in the truck, now!" I screamed frantically. Without question, maybe because he could hear the commotion behind us, he hopped in the passenger seat and opened the back door for the others. I ran around to the driver's seat as fast as I could and started the truck, or I tried to. After about 5 seconds of prayer and trying, she fired right up. And right on cue, a man stepped out into the middle of the road to block our way. If that's how it was going to be, it was either going to be his death or mine. And I chose his. Right before I hit him with the truck, he jumped to the side and, surprisingly, let us go. On the way, explaining everything to Sam was very simple, because the man had told him he wished the others would have come too, because of the devil worshippers. The man said they go into the woods at night, and we weren't the first people to disappear out there. Sam believed us right away, because the man had left his gas and gas can with him for free, and told him it was too late to be out there. And then, of course, Sam saw the cloaked, masked man try to bar our way. Not only that, but he kept swearing he could see cloaked silhouettes staring at us the rest of the way through the woods. The road turned out to be only about 10 miles further, and we were home in about half an hour. Everyone was fine, except for some minor and a few major cuts, scrapes, and bruises. One thing is sure, I now keep my tank full before going down any unknown road. Sleepy Hollow Scares, from Joseph 122. Whenever people think of Sleepy Hollow, they tend to think of Ichabod Crane, the Headless Horseman, and what happened the night Ichabod disappeared. My story doesn't involve any of these people, but it does involve the town of Sleepy Hollow and how it changed my perspective of the supernatural. Before I tell the tale, I think it's important to know a few things. First, I've gone to Tarrytown and Sleepy Hollow a couple of times before this, usually as a class field trip, and while I definitely was creeped out by the stories, I never believed wholeheartedly that there was something supernatural at play. Second, my perspective on the supernatural has always been foggy to say the least, because my father is a devoted Catholic and my stepmother is a Protestant. But my stepmother and my sister have always had the ability to see spirits and were always more connected to the supernatural than I was. But because of my parents' differing viewpoints, I was never quite sure which one to believe more. Of course, I believed in the supernatural, but I never thought it would ever affect my life. Now that that's out of the way, I'll continue my story. This happened either my senior year of high school or after I'd graduated. I remember it happening in the fall. More specifically, just before Halloween started. My girlfriend at the time, Victoria, always had a great love for anything that came from the American Revolution. And although the legend of Sleepy Hollow takes place after the Revolution, it's still tied to colonial America. And like my sister and my stepmom, Victoria had a connection with the supernatural that I did not. And so we always took trips over to Sleepy Hollow. The one specific place we usually visited was Sleepy Hollow Cemetery. One day, Victoria and I were visiting the cemetery like we always do. But on that day, we had decided to do something a little different. We went a little further into the cemetery. I thought nothing of it. After all, there were a lot of people buried here. One of the tombstones we came across was that of Washington Irving, the man who wrote about the legend of Sleepy Hollow. As we headed further into the cemetery, we came across a mausoleum. It belonged to a woman named Leona Helmsley. We couldn't go into the mausoleum because the doors were closed and locked, but that didn't stop us from trying to look through the glass doors. After trying to peer through the glass doors for a few minutes, Victoria's mother was waiting for us at the car, just a few feet away from where we were standing. We headed for the car, but as soon as I got in the car, I had a really bad burning feeling on my left shoulder. I didn't know what was wrong with me, so I rolled up my shirt to see what was going on. I used the car window as a mirror. I'll never forget what I saw. On my left shoulder were claw marks the size of tigers' claws, and they were fresh. Victoria and her mother were completely shocked when they saw them. I knew for an instant that these were not made by human hands, because if they were, I would have felt them the instant it happened. And they weren't made by any tree branches passing by, because there were no trees above us or near us when we were at the mausoleum. After seeing my scratches, her mother took us out of the cemetery immediately. I think after this experience, it was the last time I ever went to that cemetery, and if it wasn't, I never went near that mausoleum ever again. I can't even recall the last time I've ever been to that cemetery after this. I think the only reason that I didn't get more permanent damage done to me was because I was wearing my chain and the medallions that I've had on my neck ever since I was a baby. My chain includes a cross and a Saint Joseph medallion that were given to me by my godfather. So in a way, I had avoided something far worse than just a few scratches. I don't know what it was that attacked me, or why I was the only one that was affected by it, but I do know this. After the experience, I wholeheartedly believe in the supernatural. If someone were to ask me, do I think that there's such thing as spirits? I say to them, I don't think. I know they exist. I may not ever see the Headless Horseman, but there are definitely evil spirits in Sleepy Hollow. So if you ever plan to go there, you best be prepared. Exorcism on Long Hollow Road, from Misty K. This story might sound made up, but I swear on my Bible, it's 100% true. It's also complicated and long, so I apologize, but it doesn't make sense without the long, boring backstory and supposed urban legend. I used to have a Wiccan friend who claimed to be a medium. One night while my ex and I stayed over with her and her boyfriend, one of my oldest friends, we noticed things moving and cold spots in the house, even though there was no AC or draft. I mean, heavy chain belts swaying back and forth on the hangers, despite all of us being huddled up on the other side of the room, as well as dog toys rolling across the floor, even though both dogs were asleep beside us. Being a supernatural enthusiast and terrified at the same time, I asked her about it, and this is what she told me. A couple 100 years ago, there used to be an abandoned shack in the middle of the woods that surrounded her house. Although we live in a little suburban area, we also live very close to the Smoky Mountain National Park, so we still have a lot of undeveloped land in the area. Well, the house was occupied by a man who lost his wife in childbirth during their migration to the US. The family then consisted of the man and his 3 children. Now, this man was not a nice man and hated women, including his wife and daughter. He hated them so much that he saw no need for his oldest child, the daughter, as he had 2 sons to bear his family name. One night, when he realized the youngest boy was old enough to take care of himself, he went into his 12-year-old daughter's room and tried to strangle her, but she fought back, causing him to gouge out her eyes. Her brothers, 8 and 6 years old, tried to protect her because she had been like a mother to them and they loved her. Enraged, the father took the lives of all 3 children. Those 3 children were the spirits inhabiting her house in order to get away from their father, who continued to torture them in death after he passed of old age. He too haunted the surrounding area, but my friend kept a protective barrier around her property so the kids would be safe from him. Whether any of this is true or not, I don't know, nor could I find any articles in our archives about such an incident. However, I do know one thing to be true. There really is an old angry and evil spirit that roams the area, and it's incredibly territorial. I know this from first-hand experience. Fast forward a couple of years, and I'm with a new ex who lives on the other side of those woods. I couldn't understand at the time, but I always felt uncomfortable in his little trailer if he wasn't home. It always felt as if someone was watching my every move. My new ex worked third shift, loading pallets of food products onto trucks for delivery. So if I stayed over on his work nights, I stayed alone from 6 p.m. until about 6 or 7 a.m., with just his sweet guard dog and the TV. One night, I actually did see a vague shadow of a person standing just in front of the back door, looking into the bedroom. The hallway light was on and shining directly onto the figure, but it was smoky with no discernible features except it was tall. It startled me so bad, I got my ex's attention to see if he noticed. Of course, he didn't, but he wasn't like my ex before him who believed heavily in the paranormal. After that, I started sleeping on the couch in spite of his protests, and him actually getting angry with me for sleeping on the couch instead of the bed, saying I'll ruin his couch. Turned out I felt comfortable sleeping on the couch rather than in the bed when alone in the house, due to the heavy iron cross hanging by the front door next to where the couch sat. It was my best friend who noticed and pointed it out. My new ex, though, didn't care. I still wasn't allowed to sleep all night on his couch. That wasn't the only reason I stopped staying over for a while, but it was the reason I didn't stay alone in his house anymore. And it also wasn't the cause of our breakup. Soon after was the end of our relationship, but not the end of the story of my haunting. My BFF, who I'll call B, was itching for the past couple of years to move out of her mom's house, and she could not do it on her own. So my now ex put in a good word with his landlord for the vacant trailer next door. Before we knew it, we were moving into the house next door, unaware of the terror that would soon follow. It started out slow at first, like most hauntings do. Doors opened on their own. Unexplainable but not ordinary house noises could be heard, like tapping on windows with clearly no one there, and random voices that didn't belong to us. Typical haunting signs. Except we were seeing shadows, and B was actually a medium unwillingly. She could see our guests as if she were seeing me, like the sixth sense type of manifestations, if you will. I was and still am sensitive, but not like B. I believed her, though, when she told me 3 children, an older girl about 12 to 13 and 2 younger boys, wanted in the trailer to seek refuge. This was about the time my Wiccan friend and her boyfriend broke up, and no longer lived in the neighborhood on the other side of the woods. These spirits were bound to the area, and had nowhere to go to get away from the evil spirit that plagued these woods. B, being skeptical of all the spirits she met, said it's best if we don't interfere, because helping them will only bring more need of help, and she didn't have the energy or time to deal with wayward ghosts. Keeping the bad spirit away took enough effort. After a while, things calmed down, until one morning when I was headed to work. B had already left hours ago, so it was just me at home to lock up. I checked the old sliding bolt lock and the tumbler lock on the back door, then made sure they were in place and locked the front door on my way out. I made it to my car and started the engine, when I realized I left my phone on the counter and went back inside. To my horror and shock, the back door was wide open, swinging in a breeze not strong enough to move those doors. I grabbed my baseball bat from behind the couch and scouted the tiny trailer, only to find it was empty. Terrified and creeped out, I quickly locked both doors and floored it to work. After coming home and telling B what happened, She hung a giant, authentic dream catcher next to the back door. A Native American friend we worked with had blessed it and given it to Bea for her birthday one year. We didn't have any more issues with the doors opening after that. What we did have, however, was a visitor in the cow field behind the house. After hanging the dream catcher and cleansing the house ourselves, we noticed a difference in the atmosphere and that it had shifted to the back where the field was. Now, to get to the bathroom, you had to pass the back door, and it had a little diamond window you could look out of, meaning you were seeing whatever was out there. One night we were relaxing, eating dinner, and watching movies when I had to take a bathroom break. I didn't make it past the door when a strange light in the field caught my eye. Quickly, and hushed, I called Bea over to check it out. Now, there was another house a distance away, and the porch light was that orange color you see on older houses, and it was on at the moment. However, there were 3 lights shining in the field, and 2 of them were bigger and brighter than the distant porch light. We could tell it was closer and actually crouched in the field, as long hay and unkempt grass swayed in the foreground of the aura. Bea said to just ignore it and come back to the couch. She even taped black construction paper over the little window, so nothing could look in on us. It didn't help all the dead birds and rodents we started finding around the fence line, or the terrifying screams we heard every day around dusk for a week either. I understand the yellow eyes, dead animals, and eerie screams could be explained by a lost mountain lion which wander in from time to time, but the timing of it all was too coincidental for us both. Skip ahead a couple of months, and things had settled more with only the occasional weird item moving from one place to another, or a disembodied voice here and there. A mutual friend of ours had just been released from his military contract with a medical discharge, and had moved back home. I'll call him L for short. Excited to see L, we cooked and had a few mixed drinks. We literally had 2 each, nothing to get drunk on. At this point, it's important to note that Bea had been on a new medication for a while to stabilize a misdiagnosed bipolar disorder and shouldn't have been drinking with the medicine. That being said, she still did socially. Occasionally, we had wine coolers with dinner, being the independent and mature adults we were at 22. This is important because I'd seen everything she did while on this medicine and drinking. With or without alcohol, the most she did was eat and drink things in her sleep or talk excessively in her sleep. She never did anything like what I'm about to tell you. Let me stress this is very important so you can understand that what happened was not a result of the medication or combining it with alcohol. So we're sipping on mixed drinks, listening to music, dancing, and having a good time, catching up, when Bea stops and says she has to use the bathroom. She wasn't complaining about feeling sick or was troubled in any way, she just had to pee. The next thing I hear is the lack of a door shutting and Bea throwing up into the toilet. Concerned, I asked if she needed a wet rag or water, only to be answered with the sound of the door slamming so hard it shook the whole house. I called out, worried that something was wrong, and Bea screamed 4 words that made my blood turn cold.
"There's someone in here!"
She screamed as loud as she could. The bathroom door was literally 4 steps away from where I was standing, so Elle and I rushed to the door to see what was going on, only to find the door was locked. I was panicking at this point, because I heard Bea scream for help, followed by silence. Elle took action and went into the kitchen for anything to get the door open. He made quick work of the knob and flung the door open, pistol in hand. Except there was only Bea on the floor, cornered next to the wall and tub. She was curled up with her head between her knees like a child. I asked nervously if she was okay and said there wasn't anyone but us here. That's when Bea shot her head up and gave me the most bone-chilling glare I've ever seen and have yet to see on another person. Her eyes were bloodshot, like she hadn't slept in weeks, and her voice was dark as she looked from me to Elle and began screaming something in what I later learned was Swedish. She was screaming, "I'll kill you in your sleep," in Swedish, and she was pointing to us over and over. Horrified and knowing something just wasn't right, I can only describe what I did next as feeling like I was moving in slow motion. It felt as if something else had taken over my body as I calmly stepped into B's room, grabbed a little jade cross I'd bought her as a souvenir a long time ago, prayed to God that this worked, and threw it around her neck. Instantly, her eyes were no longer bloodshot and dark. Her face was confused and scared, and she asked what we were doing with her in the bathroom floor and us standing over her. I almost cried. I asked her, "Do you not remember anything that just happened?" She said no. The last thing she remembered was entering the bathroom, and then everything was black until she saw us towering over her. She didn't even remember throwing up. She wasn't joking either. It wasn't a prank and there was no "ha-ha, gotcha" moment. We were all pretty shaken as we silently came to the realization that I had just exorcised an evil entity out of my best friend, possibly the same one that had been stalking the area for decades. What makes me think that or believe my Wiccan friend's story? The family was allegedly Swedish, and B had no prior knowledge of hardly any of the supposed urban legend. We weren't able to put all the pieces together until after the creepy but swift exorcism. I didn't notice where the woods and two neighborhoods lined up with each other until digging for answers. I didn't stay in that house much longer after that, opting to move in with my now husband. I do know one thing though. You can't talk about him, or he will come. That's how B ended up possessed. We were talking about everything that had been happening with Elle when everything went downhill. We were talking about him when we saw the eyes in the field, and in the beginning when the spirit children came to us. We won't be making that mistake ever again, and to this day I try not to talk about the spirit I named, he who comes when you call. I don't know if that entity is a human spirit turned evil or if it was ever human to begin with. I don't know what it is, but I steer clear of it and anything to do with it. I still sense it passing through sometimes, but that's when I pray and try to be with literally anyone else if they're home. My husband doesn't believe me either, so if you don't, that's okay. I don't need you to believe me to know what we went through, or to be terrified of Long Hollow Road.